Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm your host, Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. Joining me today are longtime friends of the show, Connor Exum, author of Leon Trotsky's Revolutionary Podcast and Substack, and Renee Johnston, activist and educator. And we're going to talk about education today. Renee, how are you doing today?
I think she's on mute still.
Yeah, go ahead, Connor. How are you doing?
Sorry, I'm here. Sorry.
It's okay, Renee.
I'm doing really well. I'm really excited about this topic. I've been looking for a long time to talk about what I consider to be one of the biggest problems in our education system, the charter schools, and also the homeschool aspect that also I feel dovetails with it, and how it becomes this sort of octopus of with these tentacles from all these right-wing groups, some more extreme than others, but always with this kind of God country, apple pie, 1950s throwback vision.
And usually religion. I want to put that in there up front because what I want to say to everybody is we're going to be talking about education today, as Connor said. My apologies for not getting that out sooner. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the Christian charter school movement and how it dovetails with the modern liberal arts movement, which annoys me because I'm a liberal arts guy, but that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, no, it's an important topic, the Christian charter schools and how they're trying to get how this privatization movement is getting into education. Renee, you work in public education, do you not?
I do. And I've actually worked on both sides. I'm currently a public high school counselor. I was previously a high school counselor back in when I first started in a public school. I did work for 9 years at a Catholic school, which is a little bit.
You may have some familiarity with some of the people that we're going to be talking about. No, I'm joking, but.
Well, it was different because I worked at a Catholic school in an urban city.
Yes.
That was, it was like a blue collar Catholic school. So, you had all, it was teachers' kids and firefighters' kids. And so it was a different, yeah.
I will say that one of the interesting things about these groups is that they talk an awful lot about working class education and making sure that marginalized people get a good education. And it makes me think of what you're saying about the real urban blue collar feel at the Catholic school. And there's sort of always been an element of that. Reach out to the urban poor with education. But there's always been an agenda with Catholic education for the urban poor as well, too. It's not just about helping people, it's also about creating more Catholics down the road.
Right. So, and it depends. So it's tricky because where the school was where I worked, the public schools were such a mess.
Of course. No, and that's a common thing.
Right. So that's where the problem comes in, right? Like the school exists because the public schools in that area are terrible and no one wants to attend the public school if they don't have to. So you have this barrage of alternate schools that, honestly, like, I don't know if they're really that much better than the public school is, but at least you're not trapped in a building with 2,000 other kids and going through a metal detector to go to class.
Whoa. And that's really what it comes down to. You're offering people an alternative that is not obviously part of the school to prison pipeline, which the public school in that urban environment very much is.
Exactly.
And you're getting somebody out of that. The overcrowded classrooms, the metal detectors, the obvious security or cops on campus. You're getting these kids away from that environment, which is obviously going to be a good thing no matter what. And that's going to be a big part of the appeal no matter what.
Right. And so the question then bears like, and Connor, it's nice to meet you. I didn't even say that. We go back and forth so much on Twitter. So hello.
Hello. Finally.
But it brings me back to the big umbrella issue, which is why does it exist this way, right? Like all our conversations about that stupid new test, and even when you look at private versus public and charter, like why don't we have public schools that
So that's actually a
serve
good question. Oh,
education,
sorry.
right? Like, no, but that's it. Like, I'm at the top of the umbrella. Like, we have all these things going, and it's because the system that's applicable for free, that's supposed to be available to everyone, does not serve the purpose it's supposed to serve, and that's how these things happen.
And why doesn't it? Because you're asking a really good question. Why is all this necessary? And let's talk about some of the basic history of public education and where it got to be where it was first. Public education in the United States used to be really good if you were white and really hit or miss if you weren't. There were the educational system was segregated. There were places in most parts of the country. There were places here and there where there were integrated schools. There is which one is it now? Baldwin Hills High School in South Los Angeles has been integrated for years and is one of the very few schools that's been integrated for years. On the one hand, it's a really black school. On the other hand, it's also the school Sparky Anderson graduated from. And it's always been like that. It's still like that to a certain degree now. It's just that well integrated because of where it's geographically located. But most places don't have that geographical blessing. Most places are governed by their zip code, and most zip codes are segregated by wealth. And race is a class marker in our country, which means there are a higher percentage of black kids in poor districts. And when school was forcibly integrated by the Supreme Court and the federal government in the 1950s, there immediately became a huge rash of private schools, especially Christian private schools in the South, for white parents to send their kids to instead of public school in order to keep education segregated. They called them segregation academies. In places like California and Maryland and Delaware, they integrated by mandatory busing in the places that weren't geographically blessed by a diverse neighborhood like Baldwin Hills High School. And that all stopped when Tom Eagleton and Joe Biden decided, we're going to go ahead and ban mandatory busing because that makes white parents uncomfortable. And so that's where we got where we are today. We have a public school system that is deliberately underfunded by a series of measures designed to keep education separate and unequal. It's rich and poor, but because it's rich and poor and because race is a class marker in America, that means it's still white versus black and brown as well.
Well, I can speak.
Answer Renee's question.
I can speak pretty authoritatively on this because I went to a Catholic school in Kingston, New York, and it was set up by IBMers who had the best blue collar and white collar jobs at the time, and they did not want to be part of the overall ethnic breakdown of the city. And so that's the reason why a lot of those Catholic schools that we saw popping up in the late 50s, early 60s are exactly as Chris points out, these segregation academies. And, they made no bones about it, basically, until the 1990s when they didn't have the economic backbone to support it anymore. And they had to start bringing in the less desirables. Then we got the first black student, and we started to have Asian students and Jewish students, and otherwise they would have been in the public school.
Exactly. Because with the public schools so bad, now you have the kids who were fighting to get into desegregated public schools before. Now their parents are fighting to get them into the segregated private schools and desegregate them too. Except now you have the economic issue, which brings us to the topic that really feeds in to a lot of the discussion of public schools and education in this country now, which is what the right calls school choice and what I call giving state money to religious schools.
Oh, some of them make no bones about it. They want to remove the Blaine Amendment. That's their whole goal.
Oh, absolutely. So I started this just for anybody who isn't familiar with the research I'm going to be talking about. I started looking into an organization called the Classical Learning Test, which publishes a new standardized college admissions test that they're marketing really hard to colleges all over the country. And their CEO has been publishing op-eds in every legacy media outlet he can find, praising Ron DeSantis's education policy in Florida. Now, there is a diverse and interesting membership of this organization's board. One of the board members is Dr. Cornel West, and the CEO of this organization used Dr. West's byline on a piece in the Wall Street Journal praising Ron DeSantis's revolutionary education policy in Florida. And that raised a lot of eyebrows, and there was a lot of defense, understandably, from Dr. West supporters saying, why are you coming after Dr. West in his entire lifetime of service and activism over one byline? And you obviously know that he doesn't like Ron DeSantis. Why are you taking this so seriously? Learn more about what this classical learning test is and learn more about who's on the board before you complain. It's 68 people. So I decided to take a really close look at the board and try to get as much knowledge as I could about every person on it, which only seems fair when people are criticizing me for not knowing anything, right?
I agree.
So as I go in, what I find out is whether it's big or small, and it's important to understand that there are big people and small people on this board. Dr. Cornel West is obviously an illustrious name. Equally illustrious names on this board are Corey DeAngelis, who is all over libertarian media. Many people may not be familiar with his name, but he's kind of a big deal. He does stuff for Cato, for Reason, for everybody on the right you can think of. The president of the Heritage Foundation is on the board. Christopher Rufo, the author of the grooming attack on public schools and the CRT attack on public schools, is on the board. So there are some big name, scary people on the board. But there are also people on the board like Elias J. Moose, Superintendent of Catholic Schools, Archdiocese of Denver. That's somebody who's got a real position in a real institution with real power. And we don't think of the Catholic Schools organization as being a right-wing organization out to take over American education. And yet, there is a huge turnover between people who work in these superintendent of Catholic schools positions and these private Catholic charter organizations that aren't even connected with Catholic schools and don't answer to the Pope. Now, let's think about that now. The Catholic high schools you guys went to or worked at, I'm assuming were traditional Catholic high schools where, priests and nuns were in charge and they answered to the Pope.
Well, the Archdiocese of New York and then to the Pope.
Yes.
Up until, although my school eventually did break off and become a private Catholic school.
Yes.
In the model you're saying, and they finally went out of business about 2 years ago, and now it's going to be a hotel.
And that's hilarious. But yeah, a lot of these organizations don't even want to take money from the Catholic Church because the Catholic Church is too liberal for them. They don't want to be answerable to Catholic schools. They want to hire people away from Catholic schools because that's the experience they want, but they don't want to be answerable to Catholic schools because ultimately Catholic schools is answerable to a pope they don't like in this country. Because let's not forget that American bishops are ultra-conservative and hate Pope Francis, who I think is kind of reactionary still.
Oh, yeah, most definitely.
But who American conservative Catholics are really terrified of as a screaming communist. You would think that Pope Francis was one of the scary bishops from Central America in the 1980s to hear American bishops talk about him.
Yeah, if you go through his record, you find out that he's very moderate. Even in the 80s, he was not a firebrand.
He was moderately he was in favor of free speech and criticized the government while also essentially supporting the right-wing dictatorship.
You know, his thing was like, well, you don't have to kill the protesters. You can just imprison them.
Yeah, you take care of the protesters' human rights while you repress them. We understand that you want to keep power, but, you know, pay attention to human rights while you repress your people.
Yeah, I mean, but
I'm off topic now, and I apologize.
Well, I don't know. It's on topic. I mean, because if you think about it, that's what they're fighting against. But they want to create these ultra-conservative charter-based schools, which are money-driven.
Then you've got the small timers who also serve a very important place in this. And these are people like Clay Daniel of Claiborne Prep. Mm-hmm. And let me find the other one. Where is she?
Sophie?
Deborah Allen of Athena College and Vocational Coaching. I was a little confused by these folks at first. What are they doing here? And then I really got to look at how all this fits together. So there are several levels of this. You have the primary schools, the Catholic elementary schools, the Catholic middle schools, the Catholic high schools. You have the secondary schools, the Catholic high schools that are just high schools. K-12 is big, though, at a lot of these institutions too. So they go from kindergarten all the way up to high school. Some of them, others are K-8. And then you have the people who fit into the middle and feed people into the ecosystem. These are these vocational coaches and pick your college folks and test prep guys. So that's what Athena does. Athena helps people pick a job, pick a career, and where to study for that career. And I can see somebody like this basically filling a goal where they're taking money from a family, helping someone choose, oh, you want to be a social worker, where this school has a great social work program, and maybe not mention right up front that it's Christian. Though maybe they're Christian, and Christian social work is a appeal too. That's always a possibility. And then you mention, well, hell, look at this school here. If you get into this high school, you'll have a better chance of getting into this college. And so it feeds people into the system. And what's more, it feeds people into the system who really want help making a decision. That's why they're looking for a coach or a test prep person or someone to help them choose a college.
And that makes a lot of sense. If you look at the classical learning test, you'll see that it has all these groups of tests, you know, like the K-8 test group, the middle high school year test group, and then finally the college admission. So that makes a lot of sense. And
the test prep guy, Claiborne Prep, his website is now pushing the classical learning test as an alternative to the SAT and ACTs for certain students. And you have to figure, if you're telling somebody in high school, this is the test you should take, you're also telling them in high school, and these are the schools that accept this test, so these are the schools you should look at going to.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And you know, to be competitive as a testing company in this country, you have to give tests on all levels, right? So you have to be part of the entry-level tests that middle schools use to determine which elementary school students can be accepted into middle school. And it's the same thing with the high schools. Like, it's a never-ending test cycle when you're in that business. You can't survive in that business if you don't have a test for every level. It's not possible.
And it's true.
You're not competitive. So they would have to have tests for every single version that all the other tests have a version for, or they're dead in the water.
I remember when the first time you take some version of the SATs is in what, 6th grade? And then you take another sort of free version in like 8th grade.
Right.
And it's only when you're actually graduating high school that you pay somebody to take the real SATs. But you have those basic early versions of the SATs to start sorting you out even before then.
Well, it's free. It's free for the student, but it's not free to give the test. The school and the district is paying for the test. So
of course.
That money part is still there.
But that money part is important because, again, a lot of these people, like I said, are in the test business. They're in the school business. It all fits together. But they also have a political agenda. There are two kinds of people on this list. And I'm going to be pretty bald about saying it. I apologize if I offend anybody. But I don't know another way of saying it. There are two kinds of people on this list of board members. There are white people and there are black people who really like white people. And I say it that way because I want to stress a certain shared attitude among all the board members that I've really looked at closely so far. They want to erase racial differences, submerging them in a shared Americanism that comes from their view of classical and Christian tradition. And that this is what unites us as Americans. This is what brings black people and white people together in a common bond. And they forget that common bond is an unequal bond where that Christian and Western tradition was forced on people with shackles and a whip. And you can't ignore that part and still be honest about teaching history, which is what feeds into someone like Chris Rufo being on the board of an organization like this. Because even if you are saying that you really are pro-black and you really want to support black liberation, when you're saying that we have this unifying tradition of Western thought and Christianity, and you're ignoring that one important detail of the unequal bond that existed when it was imposed and the history there, you're not properly engaging with it to even teach history properly. You're ignoring the most basic fundamental hypocrisy and criticism of the whole Western system. And this group is, so right now, basically the one question that I would ask Cornel West, if I could, the one thing I think every YouTuber should ask Cornel West if they ever get on his show is, do you believe that federal money should be given to Christian schools?
That's a good
question.
You
believe that state and local tax money and county tax money should be taken out of the public school system and given to Christian schools?
Well, I mean, I think in Florida they pretty much already said that they can. With the new charter school rules, it doesn't really say that they have to be Christian or non-Christian charter schools. They are taking money right out of the
One of the things I learned while researching this is there is a wide area in East Texas, I believe it's county by county, where Christian schools, classical schools, have already replaced public schools for the most part. And there's a classical school in every one of these communities, and all the white kids go to it, and they're free because there's no tuition charge because they're getting money from the state and the church at the same time. Plus, they're charging the people who can pay for it tuition. But the setup is so good that they can afford to get the poor kids into the indoctrination machine for free. So you've got the rich parents who are paying to get their kids indoctrinated, which is important to understand. They want their kids to be indoctrinated. And then you've got the parents who want to get their kids out of the bad public school system desperately, and as a result are willing to go to this good school and take the risk of the indoctrination machine and talk themselves out of believing the indoctrination machine is real. The person
What's the name of that town, Chris?
Which town?
The town in Texas that you just talked about.
Well, there were several. The one that came to mind first was Classical Academy, the Classical School of Louisville, Texas. But there's a bunch of them.
All right, thank you. I'm going to look that up.
They're all over East Texas and some places that could be either Western Arkansas or the Texas side of the border with names that sound kind of like Arkansas places. It's hard to tell, but yeah, they're not charging the poor kids tuition because they don't have to anymore, and so that means,
well, it's a smart model.
It is, but
it gets them in, keeps them there, and then they replicate it over and over and over again.
So a lot of these folks, the biggest one though, and this is the one that a lot of these people came straight out of the school choice movement or are still in the school choice movement. Corey DeAngelis is a senior policy fellow at Freedom for Children's Freedom Fund, Federation for Free. It's right here. I shouldn't try to remember it when it's right here. American Federation for Children. American Federation for Children sounds great, right? It's a school choice group. They want to take money away from your kid's school and give it to the religious school down the street.
Well, yeah. But Finland found a solution to this problem. They just made all the schools public at that level, from K to 12, and lo and behold, they don't have this issue anymore, and their educational system works.
See, now you see, and this is where you start getting into radical ideas, like abolishing expensive private education.
I know.
And I'm up for that. I'm all for abolishing expensive private education and make all education and put all education under community control. And by community control, I mean the whole community, not some part of it that wants to build their own little micro community away from everyone else. There are ways to do that and ways to support people doing that if you want to allow people to do that don't necessarily involve starving the actual education system of money.
Oh, yeah, sure. But another funny thing about this group, CLT, is have you looked at the test itself?
I have.
There's no difference between that and what I remember the SAT being. Where's the classical learning here, other than the fact that you swap out an article from, I don't know, some modern source, and you put in Homer.
Well, that's
literally the difference.
That's literally
the difference.
Because, see, so you have to understand that this is why the fact that they're using liberal arts as a Trojan horse bothers me. I'm a liberal arts person. And you have to understand that liberal arts, in its original conception, was about teaching you how to be a functional member of society. That liberal arts was what taught a gentleman, and I use that word on purpose because it was very classed and sexualized at the time. Liberal arts was what taught a gentleman how to participate in polite society. Conversation, a good understanding of generalist knowledge of the time, and most importantly, critical thinking, so that you could tell these various trends in thought apart. Now, what offends me for them calling this liberal arts or classical education is their system is not about critical thinking. Their system is about arguments from authority, putting Homer's name on them and Julius Caesar's name on them and St. Thomas Aquinas's name on them, and making this about received knowledge and the knowledge of and the traditions of the ancients and our Western culture. This is not about critical thinking and expanding knowledge. This is about receiving knowledge from the people who already know.
Yeah, I agree.
Liberal arts is about understanding how to decide what to believe and how to articulate what you believe. And this is about received wisdom and nothing else. It's not really liberal arts, no matter how often they say that's what they are. Sorry, that's my personal soapbox. What do you think, Renee?
So when I first heard about the test and this whole conversation came up, I actually went to the website and kind of poked around, and I pulled down their, what they send out to schools when they're trying to sell the test. So they have a whole packet that explains what the test is and what makes it different. And, it's supposed to be less questions, although I believe that's changed since this packet was released. And then they talk about where they pull their readings from, who the people are, who they pull stuff from. They're not actually 100% clear of who all the people are. The list that they provide actually only provides the list for 2/3 of the things that are presented in the test. It's unclear where the other third comes from, to be honest, because I tried to poke around and figure it out and I couldn't, which was a problem for me. What I also found, which I thought was really problematic when all was said and done, and this takes me back to being above the umbrella and looking at all of the problems, was when they laid out the statistics for who does well, who doesn't do well, who does less well, that type of thing. People with less money and people who are not white don't do as well on the test. So once I read that, my question is, okay, so you're actually not different, and I don't understand why we're doing this. Right? Yeah. Like, what is the purpose
if anything,
of another test that does the same thing that the first two tests do? I'm unclear.
I will tell you what I believe the purpose is. On one level, it's a grift. And you have to understand that Nazis are always grifters, that there's always been an element of grift in every Nazi movement, and that the leaders of most Nazi movements have made money off them in some way. The best example that I will always remember is still, and I mention this every time Nazis come up because it's too important not to understand. The guy who brought back the Ku Klux Klan in Indiana in the 1920s and caused so much trouble for Black people and Jewish people all over the country was making money because he also owned a statewide chain of dry cleaners, and he was and no matter where people washed their sheets, he was getting paid.
Got to keep the sheets clean.
And so this is fundamental. This grift is a huge part of it. This is why you have people who are creating these schools built around this grift to make money, whether it's from the federal government or from people paying tuition. They are making money. And you look at this organization. I'm going to pull this up because I want other people to see who's on the board too. I don't want to just talk about it. So I'm going to do a screen share. And I apologize to everyone. There we go. And here we go. So,
cool.
Can everybody see this?
Yeah.
All right. So this is the CLT board, CEO, president of the board, board members. Now, one of the things that was shown to me in an argument for this group was a book by the president of the board and one of the board members about how classical learning and classical education was the path to liberation, to Black liberation and racial unity in America. And it's a very strong, and I'm going to use the word that they like to use all the time, beautiful argument. It's very appealing. I understand why people want to look at that kind of thing. I do. And then I looked at the co-author, Dr. Annika Prather, who's also a board member. And I want to highlight this part. Founder, Living Water School, and director of high quality curriculum and instruction. Yes, she may believe everything she's saying. She may be a person of good faith. She may be a qualified academic who teaches, who is a fellow at Johns Hopkins Institute for Education Policy. She also runs a Christian school based on biblical principles. Let me find their website.
You gotta love those. Those always are code words for leaving a lot of people out.
Here we go. The Living Water School. Christ, Culture, and Freedom in a global global classical school. It is our desire to introduce all students to biblical teachings in the gospel of Jesus Christ, giving them the freedom to decide for themselves to commit their lives to him. If they make that decision, they have the option to sign up for a discipleship class in order to grow their faith. And as you go through more of this, it is their statement of faith, how their faith informs their policy. We talk about, we believe that man was created in the image of God, but fell into sin and was therefore lost. Only through regeneration by the work of the Holy Spirit can man's salvation and spiritual life be obtained. Now, I did not set out to criticize people that other people that I respect believe in. But Annika Prather is kind of scary. And I'm a little worried now when she starts talking about liberation, because she runs a reactionary Christian school that is openly trying to indoctrinate all their students and work them into a deeper system of indoctrination. When they say choice, what they're saying is we are going to hit every student with our propaganda, and we are going to push them to join their peers in our religious practices. That's what choice means. You don't want to be. I've had friends who have told me this story. It's not good to be the Jewish kid or the Muslim kid at the Baptist school.
Yeah, I always pondered that too, exactly how that works out. And I went to a Catholic school, but didn't seem like they were getting the full amount of it.
But this is what we're talking about. We're talking about Christian school in the place of public school, and this is even in the case of people who are outwardly liberal in their political orientation and are deliberately writing outwardly liberal books with outwardly liberal goals.
Well, what about the ones that aren't outwardly liberal, like Aaron Howard on the board?
Wait, so real quick before we shift, so Annika Pratt, that was the name that I gave Chris because I read she did like a 3-part.
That is more importantly, that is the name of one of the two authors of the book. The other author is the president of the board, Dr. Angel Adams Parham.
Right.
They
And
co-wrote the book.
they seem to co-write things together often. And Annika Prather's she's interesting. She came to the classics by way of her parents. She grew up in, I think middle class African American life. She went to an HBCU. So her story, it's funny. I brought her to you intentionally because she appears from the outside to be a person who has a sincere interest in how the classical texts may have shaped the thinking and the path of the Black voices that we obviously want to elevate when you're actually teaching Black history, right?
Yes.
And so it's such a conundrum for me because I mean, I don't doubt that these readings had some effect. My issue, and I've said this to you, and I've said this to my dear love, I love to pieces, and we just, we split on this. Is if the goal for teaching the classics, right, is not actually critical thinking. If there is a more nefarious goal at the back end of this, it really doesn't matter if all of those good things are true.
Exactly.
Right? Because you're not using it for the purpose in which you're presenting it. And that for me is the larger issue. And I think, Chris, in the end, that for you is also the larger issue. It's not necessarily that the classics don't serve a purpose. It's not necessarily that you can't teach the classics for critical thinking. It's not necessarily that the classics couldn't serve some purpose in being part of the testing spectrum if you have to have something as part of the testing spectrum. The issue is, if you have a lot of Nazis at the table planning out how you're going to use this test, then it's really not going to be about those things, right? It's going to be about the purpose that all the Nazis at the table who are planning to use the test have in mind.
And this is my point. And what's more, and people are going to roast me for this. People have been roasting me for this. But Cornel West saying, I think classical education is necessary for Black liberation and trying to leave it at that isn't an answer. He has to really answer why he's on this board. He has to really explain what justifies sitting down with these folks. Because even the people who look outwardly like they're not so bad, I mean, because you go over the leadership board, and obviously Christopher Rufo jumps out at you. The Heritage Foundation guy jumps out at you. But you've got, like Aaron Howard, like Connor was mentioning, founder and CEO, As One Christian Diversity Staffing. So they're teaching you how to hire a diverse workplace where everybody still thinks the same way and has the same beliefs. Think about what that means. This is the employment agency you go to when you want a diverse staff that all thinks the same way.
The diversity question is one that I have to ask. Where is it? And then you read his actual mission statement for the group, and it's even worse. I mean, it's a biblical representation of everything. They don't want gay people, they don't want trans people, they don't want any of anybody like that. So no diversity really.
Some of these that look innocent are not. And you should know and if you know anything about the schools, you would know they're not innocent. But if you don't know anything about the schools, it sounds impressive. Here's one of the good examples. John Daly, Director of Admissions, Thomas Aquinas College. Thomas Aquinas College, that sounds kind of impressive, right?
Is that the one in Florida?
No. Thomas Aquinas College is in Santa Paula, California.
Oh. I had a cousin who went to some whack job Catholic school out there in Florida.
Thomas Aquinas College is a completely private Catholic school that deliberately does not take any federal money so that it can not enforce Title IX protections.
Yep.
There's
another St. Thomas Aquinas in
not Saint. This is
Connecticut.
not Saint Thomas Aquinas. That's
Thomas. Oh, I got
This
you.
is not
Gotcha,
Saint
gotcha.
Thomas Aquinas.
Okay, understood.
This is Thomas
understood.
Aquinas College.
No trademark infringement.
You see, if you put Saint in front of it like that, if you say Saint Thomas of Aquinas, you're expressing affiliation with either a Catholic parish or an Episcopal parish, depending on, or an Episcopal episcopacy, I should say, depending on your religious affiliation.
Mm-hmm.
If you're saying Thomas Aquinas without the saint, you're saying something different. Am I making sense?
You're making total sense, and I missed that same time you said it, because there is a St. Thomas Aquinas College.
Yes.
In Connecticut. I think it's in Connecticut.
Yes.
It's also a high school affiliated. And so I was like, California, where's that? So I got you. I'm on the right page now. Sorry.
Now, no, if you're an experienced person in education and you missed that. Now, so imagine how someone who's just a journeyman reading over a list sees it.
Well, isn't that the point of this? I mean, that's what they really want to do.
That is exactly the point of this.
It's like when you go to Aldi's, the brands that are not quite the same, but have the same look and taste and flavor. With the
Hillsdale College, Lee University. These are also private Christian schools that don't take federal money, so they don't have to enforce Title IX. Lee University wrote one of the amicus briefs for the Nazi judges on Bostock.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I found that out doing some research into the guy from Lee here. Let me find him.
I always knew Lee was quite reactionary. That's the one in Pennsylvania, right?
No, Lee University is in Tennessee.
The one in Pennsylvania is something and Lee. It's I'm gonna
blank. I always remember that small.
Bad.
Which I always remember that small little college. It's got like 3,000 students.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's but yeah, Lee University was originally Church of God Bible Learning Center.
Right. You're thinking of Washington and Lee in Virginia.
Yes, Washington and Lee. That's the one.
Better name. Lee is a better name than Bible College Center.
But that's the thing. Also, let's remember that the reason we have all these institutions with the name Lee in them is because in the 1950s, it was politically incorrect to name a school Heinrich Himmler University. And so naming it Lee University was a way that you could make your intentions known without using imagery that had been rendered unpopular by World War II.
But don't they always spell it Leigh just to,
No, this is Lee University is Lee. They're in Tennessee. They don't have to hide it.
They went full on. In the North, you got to spell it the other way. You got to put the EIGH that way.
Washington and Lee in Pennsylvania also does Lee.
I thought maybe it's another one. There's so many.
Yeah, the one in Virginia, Washington and Lee in Virginia is Lee. It's not. Yes. It's not spelled differently. Yeah.
And then, so then you have the people who you want to be impressed because they've got accreditations from Princeton and Harvard. And then you actually look at them and you find out that they're really frightening reactionaries. Margarita Mooney Clayton, Princeton Theological Seminary. She's one of the favorite theologians of the National Review.
Yeah, her that was pretty depressing reading her bio.
Patrick Deneen, professor of political science at the University of Notre Dame. Now he's an interesting guy who might actually support some shockingly socially liberal positions on some levels, but he's also a terrifying reactionary.
His border policy is scary.
And it's just horrifying that some of these people with very impressive credentials are so reactionary and are right in the middle of the so-called liberal academic establishment.
Yes. He made a big splash. The one we talked about that book about Obama, about how neoliberalism failed, and everyone thought he was on the left.
Yes, why liberalism failed. That is, the author of that book is on this list. That's Patrick Deneen.
And then he's part of this solidarity movement group, and that has just got
American Solidarity Party
has got some bizarre policies when it comes to
it's the contradictions you would get from the. So you have to understand this is the American Nazi movement. I don't want to put it lightly. This is the American Nazi movement. This is part of it. The school choice movement is where the American Nazi movement tries to get a hold of your kids. So when you're thinking about it like that, the thing you have to remember is there were two strands in the American Nazi movement. In the original Nazi movement, I'm sorry. There were the Hitlerites, who were reactionaries, right-wingers, very much capitalists, pro-capitalist. And there were the Strasserites, who had a definite anti-capitalist orientation. They were Christian communitarians who wanted to get money out of people's lives, but they were still horrible bigots because they were Christian communitarians. They wanted everybody to conform to their idea of national Christianity, where Catholics and Protestants came together to feed the poor and ethnically cleanse society.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's the Patrick Deneen's most bizarre position if he holds it.
He is the Strasserite wing of the American Nazi movement.
If he holds it.
We misuse the word Strasserite all the time. People use the word Strasserite to talk about outwardly left people like Jimmy Dore who are really right wing, but that's not the right word for it. The Strasserite movement is the genuine right winger who has contradictory beliefs about capitalism. And so in this genuine sense, Patrick Deneen represents the Strasserite wing of American Nazism.
That's true. What I was getting at is that, I mean, that whole bizarre segment they have on paying for families that reproduce in the way they like is just, right out of like Hitler.
Well, so it makes perfect sense though. So what they are saying is, and so I like, if you are a Christian, and I'm going to just go from this is the other reason it bothers me, because I'm a Christian, but I have a very heretical view of a lot of the issues they're very orthodox on. But if you're a Christian, then you're supposed to believe and feel certain things. And they're very much about, and the Strasserite wing of this is very much about, we actually have to deliver on that. We actually have to love our neighbor. But then you get into, we have to force our neighbor to be Christian too. And that's where you start to understand that, this is sort of where Narendra Modi is in India, that we want to have this social welfare system, but we want the Hindu aristocracy to underwrite it.
Yeah, you do. I mean, there's definitely that lockstep requirement of all people in society to become Catholic or Christian, at least at the very minimum. And it's not quite clear how far they're going to push this.
Well, so it's fairly clear. It's okay not to be Christian as long as you publicly conform to Christian values.
Is it? I mean,
well, obviously that's really the question when you're dealing with Nazis. When do you cross the line? When does the night of the long knives happen and the Strasserites all get taken out?
Well, maybe this time they take out the Hitlerites.
Unlikely. I mean, if you look at the way history works, there's always a genuinely revolutionary wing of any reactionary anti-establishment movement, and they always lose. They always get replaced by the capitalist wing of the Nazi movement. It's like Juan Perón tried to play it being sort of an economic populist for a little while, but ultimately broke down and joined Operation Condor like everybody else.
Yeah, sure. I mean, even Mussolini.
Well, Mussolini is an interesting story because with Mussolini, you actually can see how the fascist element developed out of the nationalist left that couldn't give up its liberal love for country. And now we're getting way off topic again. So I'm going to take us back. Just to the point is, looking at everything else, seeing the orientation of every other member of this board, my question is, does Cornell West support public education?
Yeah, that is a critical question.
It is a critical question. And actually, it's something after you said, I'm sorry, did I just cut you off, Connor?
No, you can go ahead.
After you said what you said about asking him about the funding, I think another question that needs to be looked at is part of the plan to supplement state funding for areas where the property taxes do not allow for schools that are effective and useful. Is there going to be a conversation about funding those schools? Like, you can't force the states to change how they manage their property taxes, because then the states will say, well, we have the right to do whatever we want with state taxes, yada, yada. But there could be room for the federal government to step in places where property taxes are low and therefore the schools are underfunded and don't have what they need to prevent, to provide that type of funding. And I'd like to know if that's something he's even thinking about, because as you said, what you said, Chris, about asking him about funding private schools, I'm like, well, you know what? Is he going to fund the public schools, and how is he going to create that balance? Because the tricky thing with the public education is it all depends on where you live, right? If you live in an area where the property taxes are really high and where the people care and where the money exists to supplement all the things that the schools need, you can be in a really good public school, right? It just depends on where you live.
If you live among the rich white people, then you benefit from that regardless of your race. And in your zip code. And that's just a fact. So there's a certain, this is why there's sometimes a tendency for people to pull the ladder up after themselves, because they benefit from that good neighborhood being mostly white. If too many more people like them moved into the neighborhood, their property values would go down too. You can't ever overlook the class interests that bring people together. I'm glad Renee talked about Dr. Prather's middle class orientation, because I've said before that American Nazism is very much a sort of movement among the people who see themselves as the middle class. And it's something that wants to unify everyone around everything other than class, holding up American middle class values as the standard to which everyone should conform in order to be part of that community. And so it's scary when you look at some people who appear to genuinely be Black communitarians who sort of want to erase. And I want to say, I don't want to tell any Black person how they should engage with Thomas Jefferson as a writer. That's not my purpose. I don't want to tell any Black person they shouldn't be inspired by Cicero or Caesar or Seneca or a lot of other classical authors. I'm not saying Shakespeare isn't beautiful and that we can't all enjoy it. What I'm saying is that when we're talking about Western civilization, we should not forget that Western civilization was imposed on Black people at the barrel of a gun. And however we engage with Western civilization, we have to engage with all of it and the truth of it and the history of it and the facts of it. And Dr. Annika Prather and Dr. Angel Adams Parham seem to want to engage with how Black people learned to be free from white people, and that bothers me. It bothers me if white people believe that Black people learn to be free from white people. It bothers me because a white person is the one who recommended their book to me as something that would change my mind on this thinking. Because I don't want white people to have that feeling of unification and forget that power imbalance, because that really starts to get to a place where we are holding everyone to a communitarian standard that when we talk, that is a white standard because of the way the American class system works.
So it's tricky, right? Because if you want to just look at how something like this could be beneficial and why Black people would support it, I could see falling down the wrong rabbit hole, right? Because you want it to be, you really want it to be a positive thing. But I've been told that my pessimism is no joke. I like to call myself a realist, not a pessimist.
Realism and pessimism are very different things.
I agree. But I do admit that I could absolutely ruin any good feeling moment by simply standing back and looking at all the parts and saying, well, you forgot to look at this thing. And so if you're searching for the reason why someone would see it as a positive thing, then I understand why the information was presented to you as it was, right? And what I align with you with, and what I encourage people to do, is to understand that there are a lot of good things that are presented as the curtain, right? Before the Wizard of Oz, right? Like they're the thing that's covering the reality of the situation. Yeah. Because again, as I said earlier, I don't necessarily, I mean, I'm no classic literature expert, right? Like I don't know, but because of this test, I did do a lot of kind of poking around and reading and researching, trying to get a full understanding. And it appears that there is some linkage between what Black revolutionaries and some really great voices such as Fred Hampton and Huey Newton, and like there are a lot of people who read the classics and who quote in quotes like explain how them reading the classics had some effect, right?
True,
but right, no, wait, let me get to the but.
Yeah, you go first.
If you have the wrong people using that as a curtain, none of that's really going to matter, because for them, that information is just so that they can go through with whatever it is that they're trying to do. It really has nothing to do with elevating real voices or explaining the true nature of, Black voices that learned anything from classic literature. All of those things are really just being set up as a screen so that you don't know that they're Nazis. So this is where my problem comes in, because I want, my realism and looking behind the curtain and saying, you can have the best thing in the world, but if it's being presented by the wrong people, you have to question what the motive is. You can't just get excited about the thing and forget that there is an alternate reason that these people are distracting you with this thing that could be a good thing, because that's not really what they're about.
The thing that really worries me, and I hate to be a killjoy, I feel like a horrible person every time I say this.
You shouldn't feel like be a killjoy, Chris. People need reality.
What is the real likelihood that Dr. Cornel West would be the one and only person on this board who doesn't believe in this sort of unifying Christian nationalism and on communitarian principles?
seems rather low at this point.
I was gonna say, good luck. I mean, I'm not hopeful.
That's my worry, and that's why it bothers me. That's why it bothered me so much. I was really upset. My initial reaction to you need more knowledge. You don't know enough to be making these judgments. Cornel West is smarter than you. All that really upset me. And my first reaction was to be really upset and really butthurt about it. Then it's like, okay, let's learn more. I'm going to look at each and every board member I can. And I'm still going through the list. But so far, I have not gone through. There is not one person on the list who is not for school choice.
Well, that's what this is, though. I mean, this is a big grip for school choice.
But not just that. But not just are they for school choice. They are for school choice in service to a Christian nationalist agenda.
That's true.
Even the black people. And people are saying, well, black people can't be racist. Black people can't be white supremacists. Why do you think Biden won the South Carolina primary? Because there is a machine there that is an alliance between quote unquote liberal black Democrats and Southern white supremacists that keep districts the way they are so that white people can keep control of the state, but black people can keep being represented in Congress by black people.
Yeah, there's that. But I think more, to me, when I look at this group of collection, I see a guy who was a former public school teacher who decided to create a get-rich-quick scheme through testing. And to sell it, he's sold out to all of these other people who have their own agenda, which is to move the Christian right. And he himself might be a Christian nationalist.
Let's talk about Jeremy Tate. The first thing that I noticed something that looked really weird when I was looking at Jeremy Tate's bio, because you look on Facebook and Twitter at his accounts, he's very outspoken about his Catholicism.
Yes, he is.
He graduated from a Reformed seminary. So you have to understand this. You really have to understand this.
I didn't know he went to a
seminary.
He
is a Catholic who graduated from a Reformed seminary.
I did not know that.
You cannot get, so you know the saying, you can't reform the cops. You can't reform the Catholic Church either. Trying to reform the Catholic Church gave us Calvinism. And it is when you keep in mind that a graduate of a Calvinist seminary is now an open Catholic, paying lip service to Thomas Aquinas, who was a believer in the Augustinian system of predestination that even the Catholic Church doesn't believe in anymore.
No.
But Calvinists do still.
Yes.
You realize this, what you're looking at here. And I've said this before. I will say this again, and it's why I'm scared. So Nazism is the parts of Christianity that make Catholics and Protestants stop wanting to kill each other and kill the same people. And it does not escape me that Dr. West is a clergyman.
And it should not ever escape anyone. That fact. It really
does
should not.
escape people. I think sometimes it does escape people that Dr. West is a clergyman. I don't think people, because there's something that really occurred to me the other day, which is Dr. West says the right things to soft questions on Sabby's show, right? Dr. West squirms a little, but generally sounds good on Black Power Media, right? But how does Dr. West talk on Fox News? How does Dr. West talk to Laura Ingraham?
I don't know. I didn't see that one. But I do remember the great. I mean, he tweeted out maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, how Reagan was a great supporter of Jews in Soviet Union.
That's a good example. But no, here's where Dr. West has gone on Laura Ingraham to talk about progressive stuff, and then gotten asked about trans rights.
Oh, wow.
And has not really answered. He's gotten very well. People believe what they believe, and didn't and made it sound. And if you're on his side, it's very easy to say, well, he's trying not to offend the bigots by going easy on the bigots. But if you think about it, he's actually really not committing to saying that he's not bigoted on Fox News. And then you have to think, well, who watches, who gets more views? Who are more people going to see? Are more people going to see Dr. West on Sabby Sab's show, or are more people going to see Dr. West on Fox News and read his byline in the Wall Street Journal with the CLT guy?
No, Fox News.
So this is where the mixed messaging worries me. Because when he tells us what we want to hear in our media, and he won't go on the record, on Fox News, which one do people see more?
I agree. And it's something they tried to pin him down on BPM about that line between being open to speaking to all people because you're running a national race and you have to do that, but also understanding how easily the wrong people can twist that into an appearance of you're supportive of what those people are saying.
But then here's what worries me again, because I'm again reading down this list. None of these schools are pro-trans or pro-gay in any way. Not one school on this list is pro-trans or pro-gay in any way. What are Dr. West's real feelings? Not his quote unquote policy positions. What are Dr. West's real feelings on trans rights? In all their nuance and detail, good and bad. I think the question has to be asked now. People say, well, it's a guilt by association and you're stretching it way too far. No. What are the odds of him being the only person on this list who supports trans rights?
Well, I mean, he has said the right things with regard to that because it's been asked. So, I mean, I can't, obviously I'm not in his head, so I don't know.
How explicitly has it been asked?
It's been directly asked.
Has he been directly asked about sports and restrooms?
That I'd have to go back and listen to.
Because Laura Ingraham directly asked him about sports and restrooms, and that's where he waffled.
Right, but I think it was a conversation it was something that came up when he was on BPM. But I have to go back and listen.
I'm sure it did. But the question is did people actually get down into the nitty gritty of policy, or did they ask him in general, do you support
right
LGBT?
And I can't speak to it directly. I do. Sorry,
really
Chris, real
specific. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I do have to jump because I have to get to I have to get to the Green Party New Jersey picnic and I got to get on the road. So I have to jump off. But thank you for the invite. And I'm always here as a backup plan if you need one. I appreciate it. Connor, it was so great to chat with you. And
great chat with you too.
All right, we'll talk soon. You all have a good one.
Take care, Renee.
Bye.
Well, I think the bigger problem for me is even if he believes in all of that, he's now subordinated his beliefs in the LGBT movement,
and that's also a problem.
Or a paycheck.
Well, that's also a problem, and that takes us back to that if 67 Nazis and one respected liberal activist sit down at a table, how many Nazis are sitting at the table? Question. But
looks like you got at least one collaborator.
but beyond that, yes, the association is a problem. But beyond the guilt by association, I mean, this is an organization of people who are very open, all of them, about what they feel. He's the only one who doesn't feel that way.
It's hard to believe. And more importantly, the question becomes, all right, if you don't feel that way, if you don't agree with them on the LGBTQ, what are you agreeing with them on?
Yes.
And obviously the schools, like you said, a Christian communitarian system, it seems to be what he wants.
That's what everybody else here is. I mean, everybody here at best is an extremely right-wing Christian communitarian. At worst, there are a lot of these people who are just outright
Nazis,
racists and Nazis and libertarians who don't have any pretense of communitarianism about them. It's the commitment to referring to Christian education as classical education and a liberal arts education to fulfill their goals that they all have in common, except maybe for Dr. West.
Well, we hope so. We hope he does.
Well, and that's really where it comes back down to again.
But even himself, he hasn't never really commented on this topic. And no one has dared to really ask him, from what I can tell.
Well, no, the Sabby asked him, "Do you support LGBTQ plus rights?"
Okay. But
and he said yes.
No one has ever said to him, though, why are you on a board
but
with all of these people?
But well, no, they asked that on Black Power Media, and he gave, and depending what you think of his answer depends on who you are. There are people who have cited the Black Power Media answer as a satisfactory explanation that I should accept and be happy with. And there are people like Renee who said, well, he didn't really say anything.
I didn't hear him actually ever ask this question completely. I mean, it seems that they've danced around it for me. He
was asked about his membership on the board, and he talked about his belief in classical education as liberatory, which is kind of suspect in and of itself. But I don't want to tell other people. I don't want to tell someone else what helps them influence their liberation philosophy. So
I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, if you're going to quote Sun Tzu, you got to know your enemy to be victorious. So you're going to have to learn what he knows.
Plus, honestly, there are genuinely good quotes in Jefferson and Franklin and all that.
Oh, sure.
There are genuinely good quotes in John Locke. But John Locke is still the guy who was justifying slavery and genocide.
Oh, yeah. Hobbes as well. Anybody who doesn't use Locke and Hobbes, that sets up our whole entire property system in this country.
And Hobbes' whole idea of the imaginary social contract has really taken on life to the point where even those of us who reject social contract theory talk about states of nature and social contracts so other people will understand what we're saying.
And if education is a social contract, then what is this saying about his vision of it? It's a Christian vision of it, not a secular one.
Well, and that's the thing, is that does Dr. West believe that we should have a secular society or a Christian communitarian society?
It's not clear right now to me.
Me either. And no one's asking those questions outright. They're asking questions about why he's on the board or whether he supports LGBTQ. I hate it when I can't talk. Whether he supports LGBTQ plus rights.
Yeah, those all seem to be on the periphery for me.
They're not asking the direct questions that this association raises. And it's not a question of guilt by association. It's why do you join a guilty association if you're not guilty too?
Right. I mean, it's definitely a question of how do your beliefs interlock with these other people's? I mean, because
Exactly.
otherwise you don't join a board like that. I mean, he's not going off and joining boards for, oil companies because they want to make themselves look better. And I'm sure they would love to have a guy like him on it to make them sound better when they go in and trash the Amazon and say, brothers and sisters, it just couldn't be helped. So I don't even understand what the purpose of the test is myself. I mean, other than a money grab, because it's the same exact
money
thing
grab is part of it, but the other part of it is pragmatism. It's actually really smart. What is the number one complaint about standardized testing after you get past the racist stuff? Schools teach to the test, not the actual subject.
Mm-hmm.
They're relying on that. They're putting together the test they want to put together and relying on schools to teach it.
Yeah.
So that's how they want to influence education policy. They understand that if testing is the core of education, writing the test will give them influence.
That I get. All of that I understand. And I even understand that the idea of legitimizing your own school system with the special test.
Yes.
But what I don't get is that if your real core is education, right? Like some of these people say, why this test?
This test is obviously part of the grift. This test is a grift, clearly.
Yeah. Other than that, it makes you a ton of money.
So what did I say? Nazism and grift always go together hand in hand. So this is an open grift that is at the same time also a serious right-wing influence of policy.
Mm-hmm. And then we have the other thing.
That's why you have all these respectable-looking people hooked up with it.
Yeah, and those I understand. I mean, but the guy from England who does a YouTube show, I can't understand why he's on the board. I mean, he's a good propagandist.
Christopher Rufo is because that's just who they are.
True, but I mean, we're just saying. But that guy is a good propagandist for you. But he doesn't seem like you want to put him on your board. It seems like you want your board.
You know what I noticed? You know what I noticed going through this? Every one of these people has a podcast.
I did notice that.
Every one of these people on the board has a podcast where they talk about education all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Where was I?
Like Eric O'Donnell's.
Well, the one that I was going with, the one that was popping into my mind because it drops names that Democrats will remember. Margarita Mooney Clayton on her podcast had a very long conversation with former Congressman Dan Lipinski. So, yeah, she found a Democrat she could talk to on her podcast. The most conservative Democrat since James Eastland.
I was going to say since what's his name from the pre-Civil War period.
John C. Calhoun.
That's it, Johnson Calhoun. Yeah.
Yeah, but so no. I mean, they all have podcasts. They're all promoting their ideas aggressively.
Oh yeah, this is definitely an ideological warfare against the left. The Chesterton Academy just got to me. So you've got your Father Brown lore on the one level. So you've got your Chesterton Society. We're going to start a Father Brown fan club, and then you've got, oh no, it's really this. It's really to start a school. It's really a charter school grift. Wow. Yeah, that was the best. I mean, that guy starts off with a fan club, becomes a lobbyist, moves into his own Catholic school.
Well, he started off as a lobbyist and started the fan. That was his day job when he started the fan club, is he was a lobbyist. And then he left his lobbyist job to run the fan club full time when the fan club took off.
Yeah, but the fan club itself has now become a lobby group.
Yes. So now the fan club itself is part of the school choice lobby.
Yeah, which seems completely odd considering we're talking about Father Brown. I can just see all the PBS people just unknowingly just
that's the thing.
I love that show. I'll give you $10.
That's the problem. Is that people see the Chesterton Society and they're thinking, academic fan club. And it's not at all. It's aggressive it's aggressive Catholic propaganda and a lobby to influence our educational system.
And more so, it's really troubling that it's not even Catholic schools with the Pope, as you said before. It's these private Catholic schools, which are no different than private Christian academies with the profit motive.
Yes. Everybody's making money. Everybody, the school's making money. The guy making the test is making money. The people helping people take the test to get into Christian colleges is making money. Everybody involved is making money, which then raises the question, where's Cornel West making money?
Yes, it does. Well, obviously by being on the board. I mean, I don't think any one of those people are doing that out of the kindness of their hearts.
Yeah, and that's really the thing is, was he paid for that byline with the CEO in the Wall Street Journal?
Or the Washington Post. He did 2 of them.
Yes, that's right. He did one in the Washington Post as well.
And who wrote them? Did he just stick his name on it?
So
did he have any editorial oversight?
I do not have any magical insider knowledge into the writing or editorial process. I will say that as a writer, they have the same narrative voice as the pieces that the same guy has written without Dr. Cornel West byline on them.
Oh, I would definitely say Jeremy Tate is the primary author, but how much of Cornel West is in it? That's my question.
I don't know.
Never know. And
but that's what I mean. From what they have the same narrative voice. Mm-hmm. So I cannot tell you whether Cornel West contributed words and Jeremy Tate edited it all in his own narrative voice, or whether it was just a matter of, can I use your byline to promote them approving the test in Florida? That's something I would like someone to ask Dr. West about in detail.
I would too, because the former is a little better, right? I mean, you at least know that he had put some ideas into it. The worst is no better than Donald Trump rubber stamping, but Trump made vodka.
But it's the narrative voice that I'm getting at. It's clearly the same narrative voice as his solo pieces.
Well, sure. I mean, if he writes it, but at least there were some ideas that were Cornel West's in there, right? Yeah. That may have tempered some of the more radical.
That's what I'm curious about. What are they?
That's a good question. How do you untangle them? You can't.
Because there's nothing, as Renee covered herself, actually looking at the questions on the test. The test itself is not revolutionary, to use the term from the articles.
No.
What is revolutionary about Ron DeSantis's education policy is all negative and counter-revolutionary. So when they're praising Ron DeSantis's revolutionary education policy, they're not really just praising the test, no matter how much Dr. West goes on the right YouTube shows and says, I just meant the test. Obviously, I have lots of criticisms of Ron DeSantis. Okay, be specific.
Yeah. Well, I mean, taking your test is one thing, but I mean, we have to look at the whole educational program he has on Black history, and it's looking pretty abysmal.
It is. It's his educational program is anti-Black and anti-queer.
I mean, he tries to play around, but there's a lot of questions in there. When I was reading the whole 200-page report last night to get ready for this, where he has segments where he's contrasting slavery.
Well, what's the current media scandal?
Which one?
The current media scandal on Ron DeSantis's education policy is the fact that they said that some people might have benefited from slavery.
That's right. I was wondering if it was that one or the fact that they actually got names wrong and occupations wrong.
I don't. Well, now you see what interested me about that is that the actual experts on African American history were calling John Henry a blacksmith.
More importantly, I mean, no one really knows much about John Henry other than the folklore.
Well, but that's the thing. John Henry is an individual from folklore. We do not have a lot of knowledge about whether there was a real person. We know that a person who had a lot of things in common with John Henry existed and may have been a model, but again, not a blacksmith.
No, but that's what my point is. I mean, it seems so
but
crazy.
But I don't know if anyone really caught that except me.
Some people are pointing it out that he wasn't a blacksmith,
that's good.
And other people. That's what I was thinking. Was that's the next controversy? That was the one.
That was just part of the defense of what DeSantis said, and they said, well, they did learn some skills that might have been beneficial when they weren't slaves anymore.
Yeah,
it's like, but they could have learned those skills free too. Lots of people did.
Maybe they didn't even like those skills.
That's another good question.
You got to remember that, right? I mean, it wasn't exactly like they had agency.
There is a joke by a comedian from Malawi where he talks about crazy white things. And he puts this in the context of a friend of his from Denmark going on a hiking trip across Africa, and he's going to be going through Malawi, and he wants to find out if the guy can stay with his uncle in Malawi. And his uncle says, yes, of course. He can stay with me. I want him to stay with me. And then he visits his uncle while his friend is there because he wants to spend some time with his friend. And his uncle finds him in private and says, you gave me a defective white man. He's not doing any crazy white things like on TV. I really thought it would be like on television. And so he tells it, look, you've got to give my family something. They watch a lot of TV. They have a strange idea of Western culture. Do some crazy white things. So he says, so he slept with my uncle's wife, and then he stole his land, and then he made him a Christian.
There you go. That sounds about white.
And that's the Western culture that's being admired by this classical tradition. Remember when we talk about Frederick Douglass being inspired that he could speak about his humanity by reading Cicero. Let's remember that Cicero owned slaves.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he did. Well, I mean, you can't go through the classical world without it.
But that's the whole thing. And you can't believe that these contradictions escaped Frederick Douglass either.
You'd hope not.
Well, I mean, you know that they don't, because you read some of the stuff that he says, and you can tell that he doesn't have the Christian communitarianism with white people ideas that Dr. Parham and Dr. Prather do. Frederick Douglass is writing on the 4th of July in 1876 is particularly useful on that.
Oh, yeah.
Where he says, if war between the whites brought equality and prosperity to the slave, what will peace between the whites bring?
I remember that. Yes, I know.
And this list, Catholics and Protestants living together in harmony, that sounds frighteningly like peace among the whites to me.
Oh, it is. It is. It doesn't have room for other people.
I know you have to go now, but I think that's really a good place for us to stop too. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I don't. Just thanks for having me on, and it was fun. Hope to do it again soon.
My pleasure. I'm always happy to have you and Renee on. I hope you have a great week.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks. And my final thoughts are just to go back to Frederick Douglass again. I think that's a good place to put it. He asked if war between the whites has brought the black race to freedom and prosperity, what will peace among the whites bring? And this comes back to something I said a few days ago on Twitter about how you cannot unify the working class if you're white without being a race traitor. You have to understand how race is a class marker in the American system. You have to understand that to the Nazis, race equals class equals caste. Or more accurately, class equals race equals caste. They want to racialize the class system even more to keep everyone in their place. And we have to fight against that. And we have to build a real working class culture that includes all the working people. And we can't do that by diluting everything in this Christian communitarianism and forgetting how it was imposed by force on some of us, not those of us who are white either. That's what I really challenge everybody to think of. And if everybody else on this list believes in that communitarianism, how likely really is it that Dr. West is the only one who doesn't? I want to thank you all. I hope you have a great week. And as always, I'll tweet at you.